We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Earlier in the show, Jim Fight and I were talking about the new gun restrictions across the nation. But now I want to shift in the opposite direction and see the other side of the equation. Now, Jim, am I right in thinking that Florida is now a state with concealed carry laws fresh on the books?
Yeah. The newest state to join the what a lot of people are calling the constitutional carry movement, which I mean it's going to vary from state by state, of course, but the simple nuts and bolts of it is the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution is the only permit you need to conceal carry.
Okay, so what does that mean specifically for Floridians? What can they now do? Or I believe the law comes into effect on July 1st. I might be wrong on that. But what will they be able to do on July 1st that they're unable to do on June 30?
Right. So what they can do once this law goes into effect, and hey, disclaimer, don't start acting differently until the law goes into effect.
Absolutely.
But anyways, what Floridians will be able to do differently is they'll no longer be required to go and get a concealed carry permit in order to carry a weapon concealed. And of course, that's pretty basic. But what it comes down to is that means you cut out the bureaucracy involved. You cut out the additional expense of any sort of training requirement or filing fees or anything to that effect. You cut out the wait time, and you get straight to the matter of if you were otherwise legally allowed to carry a firearm in the state of Florida. Again, another important distinction. Don't walk out of the prison gates one day and think, hey, it's con carry, I'll just go grab me a pistol, because you'll be right back in prison before you know it. But yeah, if you're otherwise legally allowed to carry a firearm in Florida, you can just do so now.
Okay, now I think there is a fair bit of confusion over why concealed carry is so contentious. Now, this largely comes, I believe, from a bit more of a Fourth Estate full-on campaign against the idea of constitutional carry, as it's known, as in the authors of these pieces, and in fact many lawmakers, feel it will be a wild, wild west with people having showdowns in the middle of the street at high noon. What's your take on it? Before I really answer that, I want to jump in on the Wild Wild West thing. Yes, yeah, I knew you'd catch me on that because obviously despite everybody, Robert Heinlein, the sci-fi author, once said, "An armed society is a polite society," and so the idea that the Wild Wild West was in fact gunfights at the OK Corral every Sunday afternoon is obviously not quite true. It's not true based on what we know historically.
Right. Do you remember the show Punk'd?
I do not.
Okay, I think it was an MTV show. Anyways, celebrities would go and do ridiculous things to other celebrities, and but anyways, and of course it was all pranks. But the idea was to catch him on camera and not realizing it was a prank. And one day, I was a teenager and I was riding around my dad. My dad, we were talking about guns, and basically he was giving me the sound advice for anyone. By the way, is that if you see someone on the street, assume they're armed. Don't assume they aren't armed. Assume they are armed. And he said, there's a reason that they never filmed an episode of Punk'd in the rural South. And but so to kind of a modern take on Heinlein's quote, but no, there's a reason that we only have a handful of Western movies based on legitimate actual shootouts in the street, right?
Yeah.
Why did the shootout at the OK Corral get redone so many times? Because there was only a handful of them in history. Yeah, it was not as common as the anti-gun left would have us believe.
Okay, so back to the question there.
Oh yes, back to the question.
Would be ideal.
Sorry, I rabbit trailed there. No, so I think that the real source of the controversy here is fear. It's the same reason that we see, as we spoke about earlier, on the other side of the coin, states passing bans on what they consider to be assault weapons, and I think there are a few camps that people fall into. There are some who legitimately don't understand. They know nothing about guns, and when they hear some politician or some activist or some activist journalist say something along the lines of, "Oh, this guy, carried out a mass shooting with a ghost gun," or this rifle has and this is a slightly paraphrased actual quote from a Colorado legislator, by the way, has a, what do you say, 30 caliber clip, which we'll blow past that for the moment, capable of shooting, did he say 600 or 700 rounds per second? I don't know. But anyways, it was some ridiculous thing that we don't even have the tech for, and just butchered all the terms. But they hear that and they don't know any better.
Yeah.
Because they don't know the stuff.
Picking up on your point there about fear, I think that the fear would be assuaged somewhat if people were aware that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, used to, I don't believe they do anymore, but they used to track defensive uses of firearms. And I believe that the last time I checked the figures, there was roughly 2.5 million defensive uses of firearms in the nation on a yearly basis. And to me, that sounds like a safer thing than, let's say there are 50,000 violent gun crimes per year across the country. Although I know a lot of the figures there are suicides.
Roughly 35 to 40,000 every year of that figure is suicide.
Yeah. But if they realize that 2.5 million potential deaths, murders were prevented, or any other crime, really, violent beatings, sexual offenses, were prevented because of somebody defensively using a firearm, I think that would do a lot to alleviate the fear. But it seems that nobody really wants to discuss the defensive properties of a firearm, which
I agree, Mark.
Yeah.
I also think that if people thought about the fact of how many guns there are in America versus how many violent crimes committed with guns, they would realize, we think of guns as being the problem when less than 1/10% of the firearms in America are used in a crime.
Yeah, so it's education that's needed about firearms, really, to better secure the tenets of the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment. Now, one final quick question for you, Jim. After the Bruin decision, New York Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin came down from the Supreme Court, have we seen an uptick in pro 2A rulings?
We have, and we've seen them fairly close together, which I think is important. So, if you look back
you're saying there's a good grouping of
yeah, I see what you did there, Mark. Yeah, there's a good grouping. The gun nerds listening to this will get a kick out of that. So the big, the obvious thing that changed with the Bruin decision was basically the so-called may issue permit laws, as opposed to shall issue permit laws, were a violation of the Second Amendment. So a shall issue permit law says, if you meet the qualifications, you will get the permit. May issue means if you meet the qualifications, you might get the permit.
Depending on the weather, yeah.
Yeah. And anyways, but perhaps more the broader reach of this ruling is that it changed the way judges have to examine a law versus the Second Amendment. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing new challenges. We're also seeing new challenges of old laws.
Okay, good stuff. Now, you can check out Jim's writings on these topics that we've been talking about. And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I want to thank our guests, James Fight and Andrew Moran, for being here. And of course, you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in. My parting shot for this week, I want to consider the words of James Madison, who said, "The Constitution preserves the advantage of being armed, which Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, where the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms." Now, I think this speaks to the heart of American exceptionalism. So few places in the world seem to think that a free person should be allowed to defend themselves from aggressors, attackers, and even from government tyranny. The idea that everyone can and should protect themselves was at the time both brave and revolutionary. And the fact is that today it still is. It is the cowards and the entrenched that would rather see you unarmed and at their mercy. Just something to ponder there. Thank you for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.